What happens when the life you've built starts to crumble right before your eyes? For Grace Morgan, a self-made event planner who rose from humble beginnings to become Boston's most sought-after organizer, the answer came in the form of a missing chair at her own mother-in-law's birthday dinner in Rome. That single act of calculated humiliation set off a chain reaction no one saw coming. With secrets exposed, alliances shattered, and revenge served ice-cold, this is more than just a tale of betrayal. It's a story about reclaiming power, finding truth amidst lies, and discovering that sometimes walking away is the strongest move of all. Ready to step behind the curtain? Grace Morgan was a woman who had built her life from the ground up, brick by painstaking brick. Born into a modest family in a small town outside Boston, she grew up watching her parents scrape together every penny to make ends meet. From an early age, Grace learned the value of hard work and determination. She put herself through business school, juggling part-time jobs and late-night study sessions, driven by a dream to create something extraordinary. Her big break came when she launched Elite Affairs *, a boutique event planning company that quickly became the talk of Boston's high society. Every gala, every corporate gathering, and every society wedding bore her invisible fingerprints, meticulously planned, flawlessly executed, and always leaving guests in awe. Her reputation for discretion, attention to detail, and pulling off the impossible earned her the trust of Boston's elite. It was at one such event, a charity gala for the Boston Children's Hospital, that Grace first crossed paths with Henny Caldwell. Tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding the effortless charm of someone born into privilege, Henny stood out even in a room filled with Boston's most influential figures. As he strolled through the transformed ballroom of the Four Seasons, his eyes caught Grace's. "So, you're the wizard behind all this?" he asked, gesturing to the glittering chandeliers, the cascading floral arrangements, and the orchestra playing softly in the background. His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes, and for a moment, Grace felt seen, not as just another planner, but as someone whose talent mattered. Their romance began 6 months after Grace started working closely with the Caldwell family. Henny pursued her with the same single-minded determination he brought to his role at the family's investment firm. Yet, even in those early days, there were warning signs. Eliza Caldwell, Henny's mother, looked at Grace with thinly veiled disapproval when Henny introduced her as more than just his event planner. Casual comments about Grace's humble beginnings peppered conversations at family gatherings. "You've done well for yourself," Eliza had said during their first dinner together as a couple, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Self-made success is so American. Despite these red flags, Grace fell in love with Henny. He seemed different from his family, more open-minded, less concerned with lineage and status. When he proposed 11 months after their first date, Grace said yes, ignoring the nagging feeling that she was entering a world that would never truly accept her. The wedding was, naturally, the social event of the season. Grace planned much of it herself, unable to trust another planner with her own special day. But even then, cracks began to form. Eliza had opinions about everything. The venue wasn't traditional enough, the menu too adventurous, the guest list missing key society names. Grace compromised where she could and held firm where it mattered, but the undermining began almost immediately. After the wedding, the systematic erosion of Grace's confidence continued. Despite using her company for their events, the Caldwells constantly questioned her decisions, changed plans at the last minute, and took credit for her ideas. At family gatherings, her opinions were solicited and then dismissed. Her background in event planning was treated as a charming hobby rather than the successful business it was. "Grace has such a good eye for these things," Eliza would say to her friends, patting Grace's hand condescendingly. "It's almost like having a personal party planner in the family." Henny, meanwhile, played peacemaker but rarely contradicted his mother directly. "That's just how my mother is." He'd shrug. "You shouldn't take it personally." But it was personal, and it got worse with each passing year. The opportunity to plan Eliza's 70th birthday in Rome should have been Grace's crowning achievement, a week-long celebration culminating in a dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant overlooking the Colosseum. She threw herself into creating the perfect event, leveraging every contact she had in the industry. It was during this planning process that Grace discovered the first cracks in the Coldwell facade. Deposits for venues were delayed. Vendors called asking about payments. When she mentioned it to Henny, he brushed it off, saying the family accountant was just being cautious with international transfers. But when she saw the statements accidentally left open on his laptop, the truth hit her like a freight train. Investments gone bad, properties mortgaged to the hilt, lines of credit maxed out. The Coldwell fortune was dwindling fast. Still, Grace kept planning, using her own company's credit line to secure deposits when needed. She told herself it was temporary, that Henny would explain everything once the birthday celebration was behind them. Then came the morning of their flight to Rome. Henny was in the shower when his phone pinged with a message. Grace had always respected his privacy, but something made her look that morning. The message preview from Evie was clear on his screen. Asterisk, can't wait to see you in Rome. Have you told her yet? Asterisk. Her fingers moved without conscious thought, opening the message thread with Clara Hughes, Henny's college girlfriend, the woman his parents had always adored, the woman they had expected him to marry before he met Grace. The messages went back months, detailing plans, discussing a future, and yes, confirming a baby, Clara's pregnancy, due in 4 months. Grace took screenshots, forwarded them to herself, and deleted the evidence from his phone. She packed her bags, plastered on a smile, and boarded the flight to Rome with her husband and his family, knowing full well what awaited her. As their plane descended into Fiumicino Airport, the golden Italian sunset painting Rome's skyline, Grace made her choice. She wouldn't confront Henny before the dinner. She would let events unfold, and when they did, she would be ready. The air in Rome was thick with anticipation as the private convoy of sleek black Mercedes vans pulled up to Fiumicino Airport. Grace stepped out of the vehicle, her senses overwhelmed by the juxtaposition of ancient grandeur and modern opulence. The Coldwell entourage spilled onto the tarmac, their presence commanding attention. Eliza, resplendent in Chanel, led the procession, her diamond necklace catching the last rays of sunlight. Robert followed close behind, his demeanor calm but calculated, while Mary and Thomas flanked their spouses, already engaged in animated conversation about the week's itinerary. Yet, even amidst the flurry of activity, Grace felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a quiet exclusion that began to weave its way into every interaction. Eliza's first words upon stepping off the plane set the tone. "I thought I'd specified the hotel cars, Grace. These seem rather generic." Her voice carried the faintest edge of reproach, as if the transportation arrangements were beneath the Coldwell name. Grace bit her tongue, offering a measured explanation about logistical constraints and assurances of luxury service. But Eliza had already turned away, dismissing Grace's efforts with a wave of her hand as she discussed seating preferences for the upcoming week with Robert. Their heads bent together conspiratorially, shutting Grace out of the conversation before the trip had even begun. At the Hotel de Russi, a 5-star establishment nestled near the Spanish Steps, Grace watched as a meticulously planned welcome unfolded. Champagne flowed freely in the private lounge, bellhops whisked luggage away with practiced precision, and personalized welcome baskets brimming with Italian delicacies awaited each family member in their suites. Yet, despite the flawless execution, Eliza barely glanced at her itinerary before setting it aside. "We'll just play it by ear," as she declared breezily, as though Grace's months of planning were nothing more than a suggestion. The pattern of exclusion deepened over the next few days. Breakfast meetings between Henny and his father became routine, often arranged without Grace's knowledge. Family excursions materialized spontaneously, leaving her trailing behind or entirely forgotten. On one occasion, she arrived at the designated meeting point for a guided tour of the Vatican only to discover that the family had decided instead on a private shopping excursion. Family tradition, Eliza explained coolly when Grace inquired. You'd be bored, dear. Why don't you use the time to check on the birthday arrangements? That's your expertise, after all. Each dismissal chipped away at Grace's sense of belonging, reinforcing her growing suspicion that she was being deliberately sidelined. Dinner reservations, too, began to change under mysterious circumstances. Friends of the family, people Grace had never met, appeared at meals, their curious glances appraising her as if assessing how she fit into the Caldwell narrative. Conversation swirled around her, punctuated by laughter and inside jokes that excluded her entirely. It was during one such evening, seated at the far end of the table at a charming trattoria in Trastevere, that Grace realized the extent of her isolation. The seating arrangement had shifted just before their arrival, placing her beside distant relatives rather than Henny. Throughout the meal, stories of past family trips to Italy unfolded, recounted with nostalgia and warmth, but none included her. When she attempted to join the discussion about the week's planned activities, Mary interrupted smoothly. Oh, Grace, we've actually decided to do some family shopping tomorrow instead of the Vatican tour. The implication was clear. This was a decision made without her input, and certainly without her inclusion. Whispered conversations in hotel corridors grew louder whenever Grace approached, only to fall silent as she drew near. Dinner reservations mysteriously adjusted to accommodate old acquaintances who happened to be in Rome. Friends looked at her with thinly disguised curiosity, as if gauging how she was handling what was coming. By the third morning, Grace's unease crystallized into certainty. Henny rushed to meet his brother, leaving his briefcase unlocked. Inside, Grace found draft separation papers prepared by the Caldwell family attorney, dated 2 months earlier. A proposed settlement offered a pittance compared to what she was entitled to, and most damning of all, a script outlined how Henny would announce their impending divorce at Eliza's birthday dinner, presenting it as a mutual decision reached amicably. Her hands trembled as she photographed each page with her phone. From that moment forward, Grace channeled her anger into methodical documentation. Each day, she made excuses to return to their suite alone, searching for more evidence. Bank statements revealed massive withdrawals to offshore accounts. Email printouts detailed discussions about liquidating assets before the situation became public. A handwritten note from Eliza to Henny confirmed the plan. Oh, once this unpleasantness with Grace is behind us, Clara will be welcomed back properly. Yet, Grace's professional mask remained firmly in place as she continued overseeing the birthday preparations. If anyone asked why she seemed distracted, she blamed last-minute event details. In reality, she was building her arsenal. By the morning of Eliza's birthday, Grace's resolve had hardened. The sun rose bright and clear over Rome, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. She woke early, slipping out of bed without disturbing Henny. The day's schedule was packed: a private morning tour of the Borghese Gallery, lunch at a vineyard outside the city, and preparations for the evening's grand dinner. As any good event planner would, Grace arrived at a Roma restaurant an hour before the other guests. The rooftop venue offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Colosseum, bathed in the amber glow of sunset. She personally inspected every detail, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the arrangement of Eliza's favorite white peonies and roses. The champagne was chilling, the 7-course tasting menu confirmed, and the 3-tiered birthday cake stood as a masterpiece of Italian craftsmanship. Is everything to your satisfaction, Signora Caldwell? Marcus, the maître d', asked as Grace completed her final walkthrough. Perfect, as she replied, knowing it would be the last event she would ever plan for the Caldwells. Despite everything, Her professional pride demanded nothing less than excellence. Returning to the hotel, Grace slipped into the midnight blue Valentino gown she had purchased specifically for the occasion. As she applied her makeup with steady hands, she studied her reflection. 5 years of trying to fit into a world determined to reject her had taken their toll, but not in the way the Caldwells might have hoped. Instead of breaking her, they had hardened her resolve. Tonight, she would reclaim her dignity. The Caldwell family gathered in the hotel lobby precisely on time, Eliza radiant in vintage Chanel, her diamond necklace catching the light. Henny's eyes widened slightly when he saw Grace, perhaps remembering what had attracted him to her in the first place, or perhaps calculating how soon he could be free of her. "Grace, darling, you look lovely," Eliza said, air-kissing near her cheeks. "We're just waiting for the cars." The drive to the restaurant was short, filled with artificial chatter about the day's activities from which Grace had been excluded. As they ascended in the elevator to the rooftop, Henny placed his hand at the small of her back, a gesture that once felt intimate but now seemed performative, meant for the benefit of the elevator attendant. The doors opened to reveal the stunning terrace Grace had designed, transformed into an elegant dining space under the stars. The Colosseum stood illuminated against the night sky, a testament to both grandeur and the inevitable fall of empires. How fitting! Eliza entered first, greeted with enthusiastic applause from waiting family members. One by one, everyone moved toward the large round table Grace had specified, a table that should have seated 13. She followed behind Henny, who moved purposefully toward his assigned seat next to his mother. Grace approached her spot, only to find nothing. No chair. No place setting. No acknowledgement that she existed. For a moment, she stood frozen, the perfect tableau of confusion around her. Conversations continued as everyone settled into their seats, studiously avoiding her gaze. The waitstaff who had confirmed the seating with her just hours earlier looked uncomfortable but remained silent. "Is something wrong?" Eliza asked innocently, her voice carrying just enough to draw everyone's attention. "There seems to be a mistake," Grace said, her voice calmer than she felt. "My place setting is missing." The meticulously choreographed scene unfolded exactly as they had planned. Furrowed brows exchanged glances. Henny half rose from his chair, delivering a performance of concern that never reached his eyes. "That's odd," Mary said, examining the table. "Did someone count wrong?" Robert cleared his throat. Perhaps there was a miscommunication with the restaurant staff. Then came Henny's line, delivered with a practiced casualness that made Grace's skin crawl. He chuckled, actually chuckled, and said, "Oops, guess we miscounted." The family laughed, not nervously, but with the gentle amusement of people sharing an inside joke. In that moment, Grace saw it all with perfect clarity: the calculated humiliation, the public setting chosen to prevent a scene, the groundwork for stories they would tell later about poor Grace, who couldn't handle the pressure of Caldwell family life. Her gaze moved slowly around the table, taking in each face. Eliza, triumphant behind her birthday smile. Robert, uncomfortable but complicit. Mary and Thomas, enjoying the spectacle. Their spouses, aware enough of the cruelty to look slightly ashamed but not enough to object. And Henny, her husband, the man who had once promised to stand by her against the world, watching her with detached curiosity, like a scientist observing an experiment. She could have created a scene. She could have demanded a chair, exposed their plan in front of the waitstaff, made the kind of public display that would live in family lore for generations. That's what they expected. That's what they had prepared for. Eliza would comfort Henny over his unstable wife, and the divorce narrative would write itself. Instead, Grace straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and delivered the line that would begin her reclamation of power. "Seems I'm not family," as she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. 4 words, simple yet devastating in their truth. The smiles faltered. Henny's expression shifted from smugness to uncertainty. She had departed from their script. "I'll see myself out," as she added, turning away with the dignity that had been her armor throughout her marriage. "Grace, don't be dramatic," Henny called after her, another line from their playbook. "We can fix this." She didn't respond. She walked through the restaurant, nodding politely to the staff who had witnessed her humiliation. In the elevator, she finally allowed herself a deep breath. Then another. By the time she reached the street, her hands had stopped shaking. Across from the restaurant, a small cafe offered the perfect vantage point. She ordered an espresso and pulled out her phone. This was the moment she had prepared for, the 30 minutes of freedom while the Caldwells congratulated themselves on their successful ejection of the unsuitable wife. First, she sent a prepared email to Marcus, the restaurant manager, with instructions that had been agreed upon as a surprise contingency, a common practice in high-level event planning. Attached was proof of her authority as the account holder and event coordinator, along with confirmation of immediate payment reversal. Next came the calls, to the vineyard scheduled for tomorrow's lunch, the private Vatican guide for the following day, the yacht captain for the Amalfi Coast excursion, the villa in Tuscany for the final weekend. One by one, she cancelled everything, transferring the deposits she'd made with her own company's credit line back to her business account. With each cancellation, she felt lighter. The emails from Henny began arriving, first annoyed, then confused, then increasingly desperate as her tactics became clear. She ignored them all. 28 minutes after she had walked out of the restaurant, she finished her espresso and paid the bill. It was time for the final act. Grace returned to Aroma Restaurant through the service entrance, a route she had familiarized herself with during her earlier inspection. Marcus, the maître d', greeted her with a concerned expression. "Signora Caldwell, are you certain about this?" he asked, his tone tinged with unease. "It is most unusual." "I'm absolutely certain, Marcus," Grace replied, handing him a sealed envelope. "This contains proof of the payment reversals and the cancellation of my company's guarantee for tonight's expenses, as we discussed. The Caldwells will need to provide a new method of payment to continue their dinner." Marcus nodded solemnly. In the events world, relationships were everything. He had worked with Grace on 3 previous occasions for other Boston clients visiting Rome, and while he might find her request peculiar, professional courtesy dictated compliance. "When should I inform them?" he asked. "I'll text you in 5 minutes," Grace said. "I'd like to observe from somewhere discreet." He guided her to a small alcove near the kitchen entrance, offering a perfect view of the Caldwell table. They were in the middle of toasting Eliza, champagne flutes raised high, faces glowing with self-satisfaction. The first course, the imported Osetra caviar that Eliza had specifically requested, had just been served. Grace watched as the scene unfolded like a perfectly choreographed ballet of chaos. Robert stood, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. Eliza's hand flew to her diamond necklace, clutching it as if for support. Mary was frantically whispering to her husband, while Thomas pulled out his phone, presumably trying to verify what was happening. And Henny sat frozen, his face drained of color. Unlike the others, he understood the full implications. He knew what Grace had discovered about their finances. He knew what would happen if his mother's society friends learned that the Caldwells could no longer cover a dinner bill, let alone maintain their lavish lifestyle. Grace's phone vibrated with a new message from Henny. *Grace, where are you? Stop being childish and come back. *. Another followed moments later. *Mother is upset. "You're embarrassing yourself." She didn't respond. Instead, she texted Carmen at Villa Borghese, where the family was scheduled to stay for the Tuscany leg of the trip. Carmen confirmed the cancellation and wished her well, adding that her substantial tip to the staff would be refunded separately to her business account. Her phone vibrated again with messages from Henny, now arriving in rapid succession. "The hotel just called. They said our reservation for tomorrow night is cancelled." "What are you doing? This is ridiculous. Call me immediately. This is not funny. Fix this now." She texted Marcus. "You may proceed." From her hidden vantage point, Grace watched as Marcus approached the table with two other staff members. He leaned down to speak quietly to Robert, who was seated at the head of the table opposite Eliza. The family continued eating initially, paying little attention to the interruption. Robert's expression changed first from polite interest to confusion, then alarm. He pulled out his wallet, speaking more animatedly to Marcus. The manager shook his head apologetically, showing Robert something on a tablet. By now, the entire table had noticed the disruption. Eliza set down her fork, her regal posture betraying the first hints of tension. Henny was staring at his phone, presumably reading Grace's latest text. "Every deposit has been returned to my company account. All arrangements for the week are cancelled. Your family's financial issues are about to become very public. Enjoy your caviar." The scene unfolded like a perfectly choreographed ballet of chaos. Robert stood, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. Eliza's hand flew to her diamond necklace, clutching it as if for support. Mary was frantically whispering to her husband, while Thomas pulled out his phone, presumably trying to verify what was happening. And Henny sat frozen, his face drained of color. Unlike the others, he understood the full implications. He knew what Grace had discovered about their finances. He knew what would happen if his mother's society friends learned that the Caldwells could no longer cover a dinner bill, let alone maintain their lavish lifestyle. Grace's phone rang, Henny calling, now not texting. She declined the call and watched as he stood abruptly from the table, nearly knocking over his chair as he stepped away to try again. This time, she answered. "Grace," he hissed, his voice a mixture of fury and panic. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Seems I'm not family," she repeated calmly. "So I'm not responsible for family celebrations." "You need to fix this right now," he snapped. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for my mother? For all of us?" "I have exactly the idea, Henny," as she said evenly. "That was the point." "Where are you?" His voice changed, desperation creeping in. "We need to talk. I can explain about Clara, about everything." "I'm sure you can," Grace replied coolly. "The problem is, I've seen the financial statements, Henny. I've seen the emails. I know the Caldwell empire is crumbling, and I know you've been hiding assets offshore before filing for divorce." His sharp intake of breath confirmed what she already knew. He never expected her to discover these things. He had underestimated her, just as his family had from the beginning. "Those were private," he stammered. "Yes, they were," she shot back. "Just like the text messages from Clara about the baby. Just like the script for announcing our divorce at your mother's birthday dinner. Just like the seating arrangement deliberately excluding me." Silence on the line. In the restaurant, Grace could see the manager now speaking to the entire table. Several other diners were watching with undisguised interest. The Caldwells' humiliation was becoming a public spectacle, exactly what they had planned for her. "Grace, please," Henny pleaded, his aristocratic confidence replaced by raw desperation. "You don't understand what this will do to us. I understand perfectly, she said. That's why I did it. We can work this out. Come back to the hotel. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. No, Henny, as she replied firmly. I don't think we can work this out. She ended the call and stepped out from her hiding place. It was time for her final appearance as a Caldwell. As she approached the table, 12 pairs of eyes turned to her, some angry, some fearful, all disbelieving. Eliza spoke first, her voice shaking with fury. How dare you ruin my birthday? Grace smiled, feeling a strange sense of calm. I learned from the best, Eliza. After all, isn't this exactly what you planned for me? A public humiliation, an orchestrated exit? The only difference is, I changed the ending. Robert stood, his face red with indignation. This is outrageous. You had no right. I had every right, Grace interrupted, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Every contract, every reservation, every arrangement was in my name or my company's name. I simply adjusted the plans. You'll regret this, Mary spat. When Henny divorces you, you'll get nothing. That's where you're wrong, Grace replied, looking directly at Henny. I have copies of everything, the offshore accounts, the hidden assets, the fraudulent business dealings. I'm sure the IRS will find it all fascinating reading. Their faces turned ghostly white as the implications sank in. In that moment, Grace felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sense of liberation. As she turned and walked away from the Caldwell family for the last time, she left behind not just a table without a chair, but a life built on appearances, deceit, and exclusion. Grace's confrontation with the Caldwell family reached its peak when she addressed Clara's pregnancy directly, exposing the depth of their betrayal. Standing at the head of the table, illuminated by the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off the Colosseum, Grace's voice cut through the stunned silence. Let's not pretend anymore, as she began, her tone icy but controlled. I know about Clara. About the baby. About the texts where you discuss your plans for the future, a future that doesn't include me. The room froze. Henny's jaw tightened, and his knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table. Eliza's carefully constructed composure cracked, her lips parting in shock. Robert leaned back in his chair, visibly uneasy, while Mary and Thomas exchanged panicked glances. Even the other diners, who had been watching the escalating drama with voyeuristic fascination, seemed to hold their breath. 4 months, Grace continued, her gaze locked onto Henny. That's how far along she is, according to your messages. You must be thrilled, Henny. A child with the woman your parents always wanted you to marry. How convenient that it fits so neatly into your plans. Henny's face flushed crimson, alternating between shame and defiance. Grace, this isn't the time or place, he started, his voice trembling. It's exactly the time and place, Grace interrupted, her voice rising just enough to command attention. You orchestrated this entire charade tonight, to humiliate me publicly, to force me out quietly, to protect your precious reputation. But you underestimated me. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't piece together your lies? She pulled out her phone and held it up, displaying the screenshot of Clara's text, "Can't wait to see you in Rome." Have you told her yet? Gasps rippled through the room, followed by murmurs from nearby tables. Some of Eliza's closest society friends leaned forward, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disdain. This isn't just about Clara, Grace pressed on, her voice gaining strength. It's about the baby you're willing to bring into a world of deception and greed. A world where you hide assets offshore, manipulate people, and discard those who no longer serve your purposes. Do you honestly believe you're capable of being a better husband to her than you were to me? Or a better father to your child? The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Henny looked genuinely shaken, his carefully rehearsed defenses crumbling under the force of Grace's accusations. Eliza, desperate to regain control, interjected sharply. Enough of this nonsense. You're making a scene, Grace. Leave Clara out of this. It's none of your concern. It's entirely my concern, a Grace shot back, her voice laced with venom. Because unlike you, Eliza, I care about honesty. I care about integrity. And I refuse to let my name be dragged through the mud while you celebrate your son's infidelity as some twisted victory. With that, Grace turned on her heel and strode toward the exit, leaving the Caldwells, and the rest of the restaurant, stunned into silence. As the glass doors swung shut behind her, the sound echoed like a final verdict, sealing the fate of her marriage and exposing the rot at the heart of the Caldwell dynasty. 6 months after the Rome incident, Henny appeared unannounced at Grace's new apartment. He looked haggard, the polished veneer of privilege replaced by genuine desperation. You need to come home, he said when she opened the door. This has gone far enough. This isn't a negotiation tactic, Henny, Grace replied coolly. This is divorce. He stepped inside without invitation, running his hands through his disheveled hair. The SEC is looking into father's accounts. 2 board members have resigned. Mother had to cancel her charity gala because 3 major donors pulled out. This isn't just a Caldwell family problem, it's yours too. My debts are your debts. Grace allowed herself a small, ironic smile. Not when I have proof that you deliberately excluded me from financial decisions and hid assets with the intent to defraud me in divorce proceedings. My lawyer assures me that's enough to protect me. Henny's facade cracked completely. He sank onto her couch, his head in his hands. I never wanted it to be like this. What did you want, Henny? Grace asked, sitting across from him. To marry me for my event planning skills? To use me to manage your social calendar while you reconnected with Clara? To discard me when I was no longer useful? It wasn't like that in the beginning, he muttered. I did love you, but not enough to stand up to my family. Not enough to be honest about my affair. Grace felt strangely calm, the rain tapping gently against the windows of her smaller but wholly hers apartment. When is the baby due? Henny's head snapped up. 4 months. According to the texts. Congratulations, she said flatly. A heavy silence fell between them. Outside, the rain intensified, mirroring the storm within. Henny finally broke the silence. I'll give you whatever you want. Just hand over those documents and sign an NDA. Name your price. In that moment, Grace realized the Caldwells still didn't understand her at all. After 5 years, they still saw her as someone who could be bought, someone motivated by the same material concerns that drove their existence. I don't want your money, Henny. I want my freedom. I want the truth acknowledged. She stood, indicating their conversation was over. The documents stay with my lawyer unless you try to drag me down with you. The divorce terms are simple. I walk away with what's mine, you with what's yours. And Clara? The baby? That's between you and your conscience. After he left, Grace stood by the window, watching the rain intensify. The scandal unfolded gradually over the following weeks. The Boston Globe ran a more extensive piece on the Caldwell Investment Group's financial irregularities. Longtime clients quietly withdrew their portfolios. Eliza's position on 3 prestigious charity boards became emeritus rather than active. Clara's pregnancy became public knowledge when she was spotted at her obstetrician's office wearing an engagement ring. The timeline made it clear that their relationship had resumed long before Grace and Henny's marriage ended. In Boston's high society, infidelity might be tolerated if discreet, but such blatant misconduct violated the unspoken code. Grace's business thrived, not despite the scandal but because of it. Clients who had once looked down on her now appreciated her discretion and integrity. The story that circulated wasn't about a woman scorned, but about a professional who refused to be used and discarded. Certainly. Below is a rewritten, polished ending to the story that ties together all the emotional and thematic threads while leaving readers with a sense of closure, empowerment, and hope. 1 year after the infamous night in Rome, Grace stood on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the Amalfi Coast. The Mediterranean sparkled below her like a sea of diamonds, its waves whispering secrets only the wind could carry away. She wore a simple yet elegant white linen dress, her hair swept up in a loose bun, strands escaping to frame her face as if refusing to be tamed, much like Grace herself. In her hand was a glass of Prosecco, chilled to perfection, its bubbles catching the golden Italian sunlight. This time, she wasn't an outsider looking in. This time, she belonged, not because someone allowed it, but because she had earned it. Around her bustled a team of vendors, assistants, and clients who respected her not just for her talent but for her integrity. They knew her reputation now extended far beyond Boston's elite circles. Grace Morgan was no longer just an event planner. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had turned betrayal into liberation and humiliation into triumph. As she sipped her Prosecco, Grace reflected on how much had changed since that fateful evening at a Roma restaurant. The Caldwell family's fall from grace had been swift and public, their once untouchable name dragged through headlines and whispered conversations in Boston's high society. Eliza's charity galas were cancelled, Robert stepped down from his board positions, and Henny's investment firm dissolved under scrutiny. Clara gave birth to their daughter amidst scandal, her engagement ring becoming a symbol of everything Grace had escaped. But none of that mattered to Grace anymore. What mattered was what she had gained, herself. For years, she had tried to mold herself into the person she thought the Caldwells wanted her to be, the dutiful wife, the invisible planner, the quiet accessory to their grand narrative. But standing here now, surrounded by people who valued her for who she truly was, Grace realized she had never needed their approval. She had simply needed to stop seeking it. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her lawyer, *final settlement signed. Caldwell assets liquidated per court order. You're officially free. Grace smiled faintly, feeling nothing but relief. Free, not just legally, but emotionally. Free from the weight of trying to prove herself to people who would never see her worth. Free to build a life on her own terms, unencumbered by the expectations of others. Later that evening, as the wedding reception unfolded under strings of twinkling lights, Grace took a moment to step aside and watch the scene unfold. Laughter filled the air, mingling with the gentle strains of a live jazz band. Guests danced barefoot on the marble floor, their joy infectious. It was everything a celebration should be, authentic, joyful, and alive. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne flutes. "For you, Signora," he said with a polite nod. She accepted one, raising it slightly in acknowledgement before turning back to the view. As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, Grace lifted her glass in a silent toast, not to revenge, not to vindication, but to resilience. To the missing chair that had shown her where she didn't belong, and to the path she had forged since then. To finding my place, as she whispered to the horizon, her voice steady and sure. And for the first time in years, Grace felt whole. Back in Boston, Grace opened the door to her boutique office space, a cozy loft overlooking the Charles River. Her business had grown exponentially over the past year, attracting clients who appreciated her discretion, creativity, and unwavering professionalism. Elite Affairs was no longer just a company, it was a movement, a testament to the power of authenticity in a world obsessed with appearances. On her desk lay a small wooden box engraved with the words asterisk to my daughter Star. Inside was a note from her mother, written shortly after Grace returned from Rome. Asterisk is sometimes we don't realize our strength until we're tested. I'm so proud of the woman you've become, not because you won, but because you refused to lose yourself. Asterisk. Tears pricked at the corners of Grace's eyes as she read the note again. She placed it back in the box alongside a photograph of herself at her college graduation, her parents beaming beside her. Those humble beginnings had shaped her into the woman she was today, a woman who understood that true success wasn't measured by wealth or status, but by the courage to stand alone when necessary. That evening, Grace attended a charity gala, not as a guest, but as the honored planner. Among the attendees were several former Caldwell acquaintances, their expressions a mix of admiration and regret as they watched Grace move effortlessly through the crowd, commanding respect with every step. When Eliza Caldwell entered the room, leaning heavily on Robert's arm, Grace caught her eye briefly. There was no malice in Grace's gaze, only a quiet understanding. Eliza quickly looked away, her pride still too fragile to withstand Grace's unshakable confidence. As midnight approached, Grace slipped out onto the balcony, breathing in the cool autumn air. Below her, the city lights twinkled like constellations, each one a reminder of the countless possibilities ahead. She pulled out her phone and typed a single message to herself. Asterisk, you are enough. Asterisk. It was a mantra she repeated daily, a promise she intended to keep, for herself and for anyone else who might need to hear it. The story of Grace Morgan is more than just a tale of betrayal and redemption. It's a testament to the power of self-worth, resilience, and the courage to walk away from what no longer serves us. In losing the life she thought she wanted, Grace found something infinitely more valuable, herself. And in doing so, she proved that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting to belong, but from embracing the freedom to stand apart. With her glass raised to the stars, Grace toasted not just to survival, but to thriving. After all, the missing chair hadn't defined her, it had set her free. As the story of Grace Morgan comes to a close, we're reminded that true strength lies in embracing who we are, even when it means walking away from what no longer serves us. If this tale of resilience, empowerment, and self-discovery resonated with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community of readers who believe in the power of authenticity. Leave a comment below, share your thoughts or your own story of reclaiming your worth. And if you know someone who might need a reminder that they deserve better, pass this along. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. Until next time, remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step away from what doesn't fit and find where you truly belong. I'm your name, our host name, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.